Meeting number 127 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 16, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of Canadian women and international trade. We have with us today from the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, Magnolia Perron, Indigenous Women and Youth Program Manager by video conference, and from the Native Women's Association of Canada, Josie Nepinak, President by video conference. Welcome to you both. Welcome to our members. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions from the members. You have up to 5 minutes to do your presentation. Ms. Perron, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Magnolia Perron, and I'm the Indigenous Women and Youth Program Manager with the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, or NACA. It is an honor to be here today to discuss the importance of supporting Indigenous women entrepreneurs and the programs that help them succeed. NACA is the umbrella organization for a network of over 50 Indigenous financial institutions, or IFIs, across Canada. Over the last 35 years, these institutions have provided more than $3.3 billion in loans to small and medium-sized enterprises in Indigenous communities. These loans have supported more than 53,000 Indigenous entrepreneurs, and we're proud to say that NACA's board of directors is 100% Indigenous, reflecting our commitment to uplifting and empowering Indigenous communities. In 2022, NACA launched its Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship, or IWE program, which was developed in partnership with Indigenous Services Canada. The program was designed specifically to address the unique barriers that Indigenous women face when starting or growing their businesses. This includes access to capital, training, and mentorship. Through this program, women have access to dedicated business support officers, regular workshops, and microloans to help them launch or expand their businesses. To date, the IWE program has supported more than 4,000 Indigenous women entrepreneurs, providing advisory services and approving more than 400 loans. Many of the women we support are new to business ownership, and the training and confidence building opportunities are absolutely essential for moving them forward with their ideas. This is not just about providing financial assistance. It's about building community, creating a support network, and ensuring that Indigenous women entrepreneurs have the tools, resources, and knowledge they need to thrive. One such success story is that of Emily McKinney, an Anishinaabe entrepreneur from Swan Lake First Nation. Emily has built a thriving business manufacturing jingle cones, which are a significant cultural item used in jingle dresses. Through her business, she now supplies over 109 stores across North America and has expanded her reach globally, exporting her products to countries like France, Sweden, and South Korea. This success was made possible by the access to business support, mentorship, and financing through the IWE program. Emily's story is just one example of how this program is transforming the lives of Indigenous women, helping them turn their cultural heritage into a globally recognized business. The IWE program is a critical part of NACA's ongoing efforts to reduce the barriers Indigenous women face in the business world. However, as you can imagine, there is still much work to be done. Indigenous women remain one of the most underrepresented groups in entrepreneurship and business ownership in Canada, and we continue to face challenges such as limited access to capital, training, and networks. This is why investments in programs like IWE is so essential. Long-term support is crucial to sustaining and expanding the impact of these initiatives, not only for the women involved, but for the broader economic growth of Indigenous communities across Canada. Supporting Indigenous women entrepreneurs is an investment in the future of our communities, in job creation, and in the resilience of our cultural economies. In closing, I want to emphasize that this work requires ongoing collaboration and investment. As we've seen with the IWE program, when Indigenous women are given the right resources, they don't just succeed, they lead, they innovate, and they create opportunities for others in their communities. Thank you for your time today and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of NACA and the women entrepreneurs we are proud to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perron. On to Ms. Nepinak, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Yes, good
Unmute yourself.
afternoon. Yes, I have. And thank you so much for having me as part of this discussion today. My name is Josie Nepinak, and I am an Anishinaabe, originally from Treaty 4 territory, and also the president of the Native Women's Association of Canada. And I'm very pleased to be invited to participate in the discussion. Entrepreneurship for Indigenous women is critical as it creates a pathway to financial independency and to effectively empower Indigenous women, women and girls, 2S, Two-Spirit individuals. NWAC has done tremendous work in this area as it is one of our huge policy areas. What we have found, and this is from some of the stats, is that 22,000 Indigenous women, 22,245 Indigenous women were self-employed, making a 46% increase from 15,000, and that was in the year of 2011, and that is through the National Household Survey. And we have also found that despite some of the increases that Indigenous women have faced challenges in accessing capital and securing financial business opportunities. We found that Indigenous women often self-fund their business enterprises and usually rely on their personal savings as their main source of financing due to lack of capital. Indigenous women often self-fund because of their lack of knowledge or the lack of access. Sometimes it has to do with lack of confidence in approaching financial institutions and the aversion to debt. For instance, the Atlantic Policy Congress on First Nations Chief Secretariat found that the main source of startup funding for First Nations women were their personal savings. Additionally, 16% had no funding at all, and 89% did not use any government or other support programs to start their businesses. Some of the barriers include, as I mentioned earlier, lack of access to financing, maintaining a work-life balance. As primary givers, Indigenous women are often sole parents and may be caring for their parents, their grandchildren, and other family members. There is certainly sexism and gender bias. We experience sexism at a higher rate and are not often regarded as seriously as men. And it's often been shared that men are given preferential treatment in communities as well. There's often the lack of support and training within the communities, particularly in rural and remote communities where the services are not available to them around business workshops. There may be no childcare available. And another issue is the Indian Act. The Indian Act creates obstacles for Indigenous peoples wanting to start business on the reserve. It could restrict access and complicates ownership and transfers and discriminates against women, limiting the ability to secure financing and business opportunities. We want to say that Indigenous women have significant impact within families, communities, and economies with successful business. And building on the strengths, Indigenous women can increase returns to the economy, create and provide jobs, and enrich communities. Some key points that we've come up with are worthy investments. Indigenous women are often seen as a risk. However, they have proven to be worth the risk. Business Corporation lent a total of $18.6 million to Indigenous women, and only 5% had loan write-offs. In comparison, $55.6 million lent to Indigenous men, 18% had loan write-offs. Indigenous women conduct research and collect the right information prior to starting business. They also utilize business support services such as grant applications, financial coaching, and tax filing compared to men. But what I really want to tell you about, because I have limited time, is the couple of stories before, is that NWAC supports programs and services for Indigenous women and girls and 2S and gender diverse peoples, and advocates for their right for economic inclusion through employment, entrepreneurship, education, and training. In doing so, NWAC has established two overarching goals. One is to advocate to the Government of Canada to increase funding and entrepreneurship training, education, and organizations led by Indigenous women and girls, 2S plus people, to develop flexible and innovative education and or training for accessibility in urban, rural, and remote communities and where people reside. NWAC has addressed funding gaps and support in economic programs for Indigenous women. Our ongoing programs include Beat the Drum, and this is an entrepreneurship program of Indigenous women across the country. And currently, we have hundreds of women who have subscribed to this program. In the program, we host Aboriginal women's entrepreneurship workshop conferences. We do some coaching around business development, management, and entrepreneurship skills as well. We also do an ISETS program, which offers scholarships and training for
Ms.
Indigenous
Nepenak,
women.
sorry, my
Yes.
apologies for interrupting, but if you could just close, please, for the moment.
Yes, I will close for now. So investing in Indigenous women in this country is the way to go, and the more that we can advocate and have these conversations is a very worthwhile venture and investment for the future. Thank you.
On to members' questions. Ms. Gray for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and for explaining the work that you do, and thank you for the work that you do in your communities. I've got a few questions here, and I'd like to ask them to both of our witnesses, so I'll ask it and then go back and forth between both of you, if that's okay. So my first question is, Global News reported that it was, quote, an open secret within Ottawa's procurement community that non-Indigenous companies have been finding ways to get around the program's rules to access the billions in annual contracts meant for Indigenous businesses. Conservatives and others have been raising the alarm bells on this fraud within the Indigenous procurement programs. And this could be lost opportunities for Indigenous companies, including women and companies that you represent. We now know that this was true, and are you concerned the government didn't address this even though there were warning signs on this? We'll ask Magnolia Perrin first.
Thank you, Tracy, for your question. This is a topic that our organization, NACA, and our CEO, Shannon Metatababan, has been bringing forward very recently to address the procurement issue of indigeneity. And I think it is concerning that these opportunities have been taken advantage of by companies that are not truly Indigenous owned and controlled. I think for the communities and entrepreneurs we represent, part of what we try to do is ensure that the entrepreneurs that we're supporting are in fact Indigenous. And through our network of Indigenous financial institutions, we do a verification process and do our due diligence to ensure that the entrepreneurs that are accessing our programming and loans and grants are in fact Indigenous. And so what I'd like to end with is that it should be Indigenous communities, Indigenous right holders, overseeing that verification of who in fact is an Indigenous business. Thank you.
Thank you. And Josie Nepenak?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think it's a very, very important question, particularly we know in the news now that there are issues. And I believe that there has to be better regulations around the identification of who is an authentic Indigenous business, and to have that heavily regulated and scrutinized as well, because it's this is certainly an economic loss and opportunity for all Indigenous people, but particularly for Indigenous women, who often, as I mentioned earlier, are the lone home givers, and needing to ensure that they become a part of that business, and so I would say greater regulations and scrutiny overseen by or a committee of Indigenous people. It's not enough to say, well, I lived at a First Nation, so that makes me Indigenous, or that it has to be much stronger and better regulated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And we know that the Liberal government had to remove actually 1,100 non-Indigenous owned businesses from the Indigenous Business Directory after the investigation with Global. And we also know that the Liberal Minister of Employment, his company Global Health Imports, said it was a wholly Indigenous owned company while bidding on federal contracts. And the minister previously identified himself as Indigenous, with the Liberal Party had said that he was Indigenous, but now he admits that he's not, and we know that he is stepping down. Do actions like those of that minister and his former company set a bad example that companies shouldn't expect consequences if they're caught and not being honest when they're filling out applications? And we'll go first to Magnolia Perrin.
I think this goes back to what Josie shared in terms of there needs to be scrutiny when these examples of fraudulent Indigenous businesses come to light. And so it's important that we're holding people accountable. And I think that's what's going to build trust back with Indigenous communities and Indigenous entrepreneurs, and address some of the challenges that we're facing in the procurement process, and working with Indigenous right holders, Indigenous communities to identify those that are true Indigenous businesses is the way forward. And we really need that accountability, that scrutiny that we spoke about. Thank you.
Thank you. And Josie Nepinak, we've got about 20 seconds.
There has to be a vetting process prior to application from the individuals who are claiming to have Indigenous background, and we have to go through a screening of some sort that they are actually a part of the Indigenous community. And to do that, a strong Indigenous community overseeing would be an option. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Fortier, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being there today. We decided to extend this study because we did want to listen to Indigenous voices and making sure that you were part of this study. And I'm hopeful that we will have great recommendations to see how do we encourage Indigenous women to participate in international trade and also continue to do their business across the nation. My questions are really to help see how do we engage Indigenous women in making sure they have the platform to be able to do some international trade. And I was just wondering if you know about or how, the women entrepreneurship strategy is helpful to bring light and support for women to do this. I'll start with Madame Perron. First, I also understand that NACA received over $1.2 million to support Indigenous women. So maybe that is an example of what you could share on how it is either helping or what else we could do to support.
Yes, thank you for your question. The Women Entrepreneurship Strategy has been critical for our organization and many others to advance initiatives to support women entrepreneurship broadly, and of course for us, Indigenous women entrepreneurship. We've received, in addition to the $1.2 million, to help us do some research, develop a role model profiles of Indigenous women who successfully started businesses. We developed a microloan fund framework so we could support women through microfinance. We also developed training internally for our network using the Gender-Based Analysis Plus framework, the GBA tool, so that we could look at our own policies and practices to see where we can be more inclusive to Indigenous women and other gender diverse folks. We also deliver the Women Entrepreneurship Loan Fund. That was part of the West strategy, and that is helping Indigenous women as well access capital to build and grow their business. We have two funds. Our IWE Microloan Fund, women can access loans up to $20,000. So that's really supporting women that are just starting out and often for new businesses. We found with the Women Entrepreneurship Loan Fund, women then are able to kind of level up and then access a slightly larger fund through that program, $50,000, to help them then grow their business and expand the opportunities for them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Would you like to complete, Madame Nepinac? Do you have an answer? I'm not sure if your organization received or not funds under the WES strategy.
No, we haven't. But I strongly believe that the conversation that we're having today needs to continue on different levels, and that the continuing knowledge, awareness, and building relationships with Indigenous women is part of the process. I think when I was considering this, I was thinking that this is a fairly new concept as well for many Indigenous women, because our history has been based on bartering and trade, for many years, and I've seen it in my lifetime through my own family communities as well. But I think it's important to note that that NWAC continues to do the advocacy and to come to those policy tables and to make suggestions around creating greater access and opportunities and funding and resources and in some cases wraparound services and supports, because when women are starting out, they need the childcare, the education, the work, everything that's required to set that business off.
Can you confirm that the government should continue to invest in the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy? And if so, are there anything else that we should be focusing on to make sure that there is more participation of Indigenous women?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
Madame Nepinac?
Yes. I totally agree. I believe that continued investment and research and looking at the outcomes and the resources and the successes that are made through this program. Thank you.
Madame Perron?
Yes, I would say so. I would like to see a continued investment in the West strategy. We've been delivering our IWE program over the last 3 years, and we just did an evaluation, and one of the findings really just spoke to how we haven't fully realized the impact of our investment yet, because for Indigenous women, it goes back to the confidence, to the capacity development that's required. We need to make that investment for the long term if we want to see these women be successful in starting and growing and maintaining their businesses. So I think we're very early and it requires more investment.
Just quickly, do you have any Indigenous women participating on the, let's say, international trade that you could send us some successful examples?
I mentioned Emily McKinney in my opening remarks. That's one such example. But we do have a few different women that we've supported that are engaged in international trade. We have an example that is close here to Ottawa that we can share. The company is called Mini TP. They're a really great example, and I know they've been supported by a lot of great organizations, including Export Development Canada. So there's a few different success stories we can share.
Thank you.
Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your presentations. So my question will be for anyone who would like to answer. I'm very interested in Indigenous entrepreneurship. Right now, I've been looking at a company called Bastien Industrie in Wendake. I'm a member of the Huron-Wendat Nation, and so it's always a pleasure for me to go into the Wendake Nation and encourage entrepreneurship and what they produce there, which is very high quality. So I'd like to come back to the economic situation. So the Indian Act divides First Nations and communities, that we know. Each person has their own suggestions to this. I find this abhorrent. This act also makes it difficult for a company to establish itself on what we sadly call a reserve. So we've made this ability for Indigenous people to create a company very difficult. Does this lead to more criminal activity and undeclared business going on?
Whoever would like to answer that question? Ms. Perron?
Go ahead, Ms. Perron.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we know that the Indian Act creates various barriers for First Nation entrepreneurs that are looking to operate their business on reserve. And in fact, our data shows that many of the businesses we support are in urban areas living outside of the communities. They're closer to various networks and customers and suppliers and financial institutions. While I can't address your question exactly in terms of criminal activity that could be taking place in terms of business and entrepreneurship, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings for Indigenous entrepreneurs about what it means to operate a business on reserve and what legal and regulatory requirements need to be followed. Thank you.
Si Madame voulait ajouter quelque chose.
If our other witness would like to add something, Ms. Nepinak?
Yes. Thank you so much for the question. And yes, absolutely right. The Indian Act does create obstacles for Indigenous people. Complications around land ownership and transfers, and discriminates against women very, very strongly. And so that it decreases their ability to access financing and business opportunities. The other piece is the Indigenous lens, or the view, is that ownership is collective. For example, if there is a bison farm in a community that does not belong to one specific family, it belongs to the entire community. And so that's and so is that a barrier to entrepreneurship? I'm not sure, because the collective thinking and the collective ownership to this bison farm relates to sustenance, to food, and to be able to live, a good quality of life, because there is that's available to the community. But in terms of whether or not there is criminality, I believe that there are systemic issues perpetuated by governments that can lead to criminality. Absolutely, but whether or not it does, I think that needs further study and questioning. Thank you.
Puis on sait qu'en 2000.
In 2022, the government promised to award at least 50% of federal contracts to Indigenous led and owned companies. Where are we in terms of this promise? Did they meet their goal here? And could you share anything else pertaining to the topic?
You have to unmute yourself, Ms. Nipinak.
Yes. That question, I wasn't aware that the government had made that position. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Je ne sais pas si Mme Perron voudrait ajouter quelque chose.
Ms. Perron, would you like to add anything?
My understanding with the, at least with the 5% set aside for Indigenous businesses that the federal government has, it's been very slow moving. I know the Department of Indigenous Services Canada is outperforming other departments. I'm aware of that. It would be nice to see improvement across all departments, and of course, addressing the earlier topic of indigeneity and fraudulent claims to indigeneity would be necessary.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Descharlet.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being present today. It really is always a good day when we can have some strong Indigenous voices in the House of Commons speak to the very important needs of Indigenous people. This study, as you just heard from some of the questions just earlier, was originally focused on women, Canadian women in international trade. It was expanded largely to help include Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, that face some of the greatest economic barriers across the country. You're doing an immense job. You're lifting boulders, massive boulders, that women have been carrying in our country for a very long time and smashing barriers with it. So I want to just say thank you for your immense service and contribution to Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, as we strive to see our nations rebuilt and take their rightful place in our economy. You know just as good as I do that Indigenous people have long stewarded this place. We have big trade agreements that stem from nation to nation to nation for thousands of years. How else do you get an obsidian arrowhead all the way up to Tuktoyaktuk? That's through trade, that's through commerce. And you're rebuilding something that colonialism's taken away from us, which is our very, very important opportunity for the next generation to prosper. We've noted several challenges to that prosperity today. One of them, of course, is this significant issue of the lack of verifiability of Indigenous people who are persons who are claiming to be Indigenous for the purpose of federal grants. This is a serious issue. We've been dealing with this issue here in the House of Commons. We're talking millions of dollars at risk. One of my previous colleagues just mentioned 1,100 companies were just delisted. 1,100. 1,100. That's immense. That's the amount of inappropriateness that's taking place when it comes to federal grants and services. So I'm concerned when we think about, for example, the Women Entrepreneur Strategy. I'm concerned that Indigenous women or non-Indigenous people could be claiming to be an Indigenous company for the purpose of even this fund. We don't know how far this issue goes. So it's a really incredibly important issue that we address here at the House of Commons, that we have verifiability for when Indigenous people are applying to grants, services, and programs so that it truly gets to the people it's meant to get to. The risk we run when we allow persons to apply that are not Indigenous and not verified, that literally means money out of the pockets of Indigenous people. That's why Indigenous people are so angry, legitimately angry and legitimately upset about this very critical issue. And so I was really pleased that you mentioned some of the solutions to this, which is to involve Indigenous people. Wow, what a incredibly important advice that I wish that we would have taken credence of prior to some of these very serious issues. In addition to bringing awareness to this issue, what other advice would you have for lawmakers when trying to ensure that if or when we create a program related for Indigenous women, that we can create verifiability for that work? How do you do that in your own organizations? And I think that could maybe even be a model that can help us to understand why this is a credible issue. For both of you, maybe starting with Madame Perron.
Yes, thank you for the question. For us, when we developed our Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program, we defined what was an Indigenous women-owned business by a business that is owned over 51% by an Indigenous woman, but they also had to have effective control over their business. So that meant that they had to be essential to the operations and the success of the business. We also added additional layers, particularly around husband and wife, if they would be eligible for the program, and ultimately based on an advisory council that was formed, made up of members of our Indigenous financial institutions, they felt that they would not be eligible for the business in the case that then, it's not truly an Indigenous women-led or owned business, but they're, ultimately the husband is the one running the business, and it would fall outside of who we're trying to support. So those are some of the mechanisms we put in place. We also rely heavily on our Indigenous financial institutions who are located across the country in communities and have those connections to do the verification of Indigenous identity. Thank you for the question.
Madame Nipnek?
Yes, thank you. And it's nice to meet you, Mr. Desjardins, online. And I believe that taking those contracts and grants from Indigenous applicants or pretending that you're Indigenous is bordering on criminality and fraudulent behavior. Would this happen to other non-Indigenous entities? And would they get away with it? Because they've been getting away with it for far too long, right? And so unless we involve Indigenous women in Indigenous communities, all communities, to be involved in that vetting process and to participate in what that model and that framework will look like, we're going to continue to fall through those loopholes where people will have opportunity to somehow sneak in there to gain some of those access, those dollars, which rightfully go to the rights holders and the first peoples of this land, which are Indigenous people. Thank you for your question.
So, Mr. Niba, your time is up.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Baldinelli. If we can just remember, this is about women's entrepreneurship strategy and how we can, I gather, improve it as we move forward, right? So, okay. Huh?
I can speak to your comment if you'd like.
No, you don't need to. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure we stayed focused.
No, I believe it's incredibly important. A point of order.
On a point of order. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. To that last comment, I believe that's debate. What you're mentioning is you're contributing to the debate on this, and I agree with my colleagues that the questions that we pose in this place, particularly when it comes to the question of who can access the fund that we're talking about today, was the question I was posing. So if your comment was directed at me, okay, as long as we can make sure that we can continue to have a scope of our discussion that allows Indigenous people to have the questions and answers that we pose fairly included in the study.
It's an important response that we're getting from the witnesses. Absolutely.
I hope you agree.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here this afternoon. I'm going to start with Ms. Perron. And I would suggest the Government of Canada has a lot of work to do when it comes to making up for lost opportunities with women-led Indigenous businesses, particularly when it comes to tourism opportunities and the tourism sector. We have a former Minister of Tourism and Employment who misrepresented himself as Indigenous and proudly proclaimed this over his time in office, particularly when they were doing the consultations on the National Tourism Strategy. And yet when that strategy was tabled, it included a pillar for a national strategy, including Indigenous tourism, yet it overpromised and underdelivered, which is kind of typical of this government's record of disappointment. Just think, in Budget 2022, the only mention of tourism was $20 million, which was for Indigenous tourism. It was a 2-year program, but yet the funding never flowed for essentially 2 years. I mean, $10 million was promised to the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada, and yet they had to wait for 2 years for that funding. The other $10 million, and Ms. Prana, that's why I'm going to be coming to you, had been promised to the National Aboriginal Capital Corp Association. And that $10 million is going to go to the Signature Indigenous Tourism Experience Stream. It's a pilot project with grants from $500,000 to $1.25 million, and it's going to fund from 8 to 12 projects. Now, has the criteria been developed for that? Have applications been submitted? And particularly, are we seeing women-led businesses applying for that?
Thank you for your question. I'm not directly involved on that project within my organization, but I am aware that we've received the funding. Applications have been received and have been reviewed, and I believe the selected candidates have been chosen. What I can't speak to if they've been notified at this point. I do know we did have applicants that were Indigenous women-owned businesses, which was great to hear and to see. But again, I can't speak to if the selected applicants have been notified at this point and what percentage of those were or are Indigenous women-owned businesses. But what I will also add, tourism is an important industry, Indigenous tourism in particular. This is a project that we saw high demand for and that we'd like to continue to deliver in the future because we see there's a need and an interest, and we can help our communities advance in the tourism industry and increase economic prosperity. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. But at the same time, we've got a national association who is the voice for Indigenous Tourism Canada, and yet that additional $10 million went to your corporation and not to ITAC. So I'm just wondering, why do you think the federal government selected NAC as a delivery vehicle for this program and not the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada?
Thank you for your question. I'll speak to why was NACA selected as the delivery organization, and I think that goes back to our track record. We're a national Indigenous organization. We've been around for over 35 years. We have member associations across the country that have been working with Indigenous entrepreneurs and community-based businesses, and we have a high repayment rate, very little loan write-offs, loan losses, and we've built what I would say a very good relationship with the federal government and establish that trust to be able to deliver results on a program like this tourism project. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, how much time?
Seconds.
And Ms. Perron, if you could then just respond to me, what is the relationship between your organization and ITAC?
Thank you very much for your question. We maintain good relationships with various national Indigenous organizations, ITAC being one of them. I know we're short on time. Thank you.
Very much. On to Mr. Sidhu for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here on this important study. I was reading on the NACA website the importance of federal funding, and I just want to make sure I read this into the record. It says, the inclusion of NACA in Budget 2024 demonstrates the government's commitment to advancing Indigenous economic prosperity. This funding will enable us to continue our transformative work, breaking down systemic barriers and fostering economic participation aligned with Indigenous cultural values. We acknowledge and thank the Government of Canada for their strong belief, support, and inclusion of NACA and the networks of IFIs as we look forward to a continuance of collaborative positive outcomes towards Indigenous prosperity. Ms. Perron, speaking to some of this funding that's been supportive of many Indigenous entrepreneurs, especially female entrepreneurs, can you speak to what this means to NACA, what it would mean for the hundreds of women that you currently support through maybe microgrants or other programs that you run?
Yes, thank you so much. We were very pleased and very appreciative for the Budget 2024 inclusion for our organization. With that funding, that means we'll be able to continue our Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program over the next 5 years. So rather than winding it down this March, we'll actually be ramping it up. And what that means for the almost 30 business support officers that have been hired across the country many of who are Indigenous women themselves, they have that job security to stay in their role and continue to work with Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And that's a really important part of the program, is having women in client-facing roles. It also means we'll be able to expand the programs we offer, and we're looking at building a program for young Indigenous entrepreneurs, youth between the ages of 18 and 39, as well as enhancing our other core Aboriginal entrepreneurship program. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And as our government remains focused on growing trade, unlocking doors, and giving Canadian products access to new markets around the world, we recently announced a Canada-Indonesia trade agreement that would help give access to over 200 million people, 200 million more consumers for Canadian products in Indonesia. Where do you see trade fit in with Indigenous entrepreneurs, especially women? Is there a focus on that from your organization going forward, maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, or is that something that you want to prioritize now?
Trade is an important part of the entrepreneurial journey. Our current IWE program is, as I mentioned, focused more on micro-lending. So we're supporting women with smaller, part-time, home-based type of businesses. However, the intention is to help them grow their business, expand on the type of capital they're able to access by building that track record with our financial institutions, and hopefully be able to grow and expand and export and trade internationally. So that's certainly on the horizon for us, for our Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program. And then, of course, for NACA more broadly, and all Indigenous entrepreneurs we support. That's an important part of what we do and what we want to support our members with.
Thank you for that. And maybe I can turn to Ms. Nepinak. If you can kind of speak to, and maybe Ms. Perrin, you can comment on this as well, what more can the government do to assist women entrepreneurs, women in trade? From your perspective, what more can we do in the coming years?
Thank you for the question. I would recommend that continue doing what you're doing with increased resources, so that we start women from the very developmental stages of, women are using their savings, they continue to look after their children or other family members. And how do we do that step-by-step process? And I believe that with every step, there would be funding, support, wraparound services. What is international trade? How do I access that? What is the coaching? What is the mentoring that should be involved in that process as well? Because Indigenous women are very, very interested in being part of that entrepreneurship, but without the supports, which in some cases, in many cases, that support has not been there, and we have to ensure that the continuity and building on that. Thank you.
Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Alors oui,
My question will be for Ms. Perron. We've been talking about supply chains, and we know that currently you have to, for the average company, you have to register to have a business number. It's called the NIC or NIQ rather, in Quebec. And I'm assuming that other provinces have something similar. So we want to for an Indigenous company to be able to use this system, they have to register with the Canadian Indigenous Supplier Council. So how does this work? We know that there are cases of non-Indigenous companies that were able to access funding for Indigenous companies. Could you speak to this issue?
Yes, thank you for your question. And I have some examples of entrepreneurs that have experienced this type of activity in terms of businesses approaching them simply because they're an Indigenous business, wanting to partner on a bid for a procurement opportunity, but they're not meaningfully involved or benefiting really from the project. And there's a specific example where when they initially were approved for the project, they had an Indigenous partner. The contract was continuously renewed year after year, but the Indigenous partner was dropped and no longer part of the project. But that non-Indigenous business was still benefiting from the contract that was put aside for an Indigenous business. So these types of scenarios are continuing to happen, and we need to have a mechanism in place to really prevent it. I think prevention needs to be our focus going forward. And of course, we're seeing that those businesses that truly aren't Indigenous are facing some consequences in terms of being removed from the directory, but further action will need to be taken.
Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you again to the witnesses for being present in this study. I do really thank you for your contribution related to this idea of companies partnering with Indigenous companies simply for the purpose of accessing procurement opportunities. There's when it comes to a person who's pretending to be Indigenous, we call them a pretendian. This is more colloquial in a way, where we say rent a feather. You've probably heard this before, this idea you can rent a feather and you get access to any procurement you want. We dealt with this issue when there was a company actually here federally called Dalian. And Dalian was a federal company that ended up we had to stop them from getting money through the ArriveCan scenario, the big issue, where they had to admit that they didn't even know the Indigenous procurement standards at the federal government. And worse yet, they didn't have 50% control. And then the owner himself, we didn't know was Indigenous. So I really take what you're saying about this idea of renting a feather for the purpose of advancing one's own interest very seriously. I do want to ask you a question related to your leaders in this space. Women look up to you, a lot of Indigenous people. I know a lot of Indigenous women that you mentioned this in your onset, they build these companies with their own money. But then they find it difficult to then commercialize what they've built. What's your message to women who are in that position today? Nippanak first.
Well, yes, I think my message to them would be that despite all the colonial constructs that have been a part of our lives, I think we're breaking down those barriers, and we are strong, we are resilient, and we can do this. And let's do it. Let's be business. Let's do what we can to gain that self-sufficiency. Thank you.
Ms. Perron, okay.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for the question. I think for me, my recommendation or advice would be to find their support system, find mentors, find other entrepreneurs, Indigenous women entrepreneurs that can support them, that are like-minded individuals, and take advantage of what opportunities in terms of training come their way, and continue to build and grow themselves personally, and that will ultimately help them be more successful in business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams for 3 minutes, and then Mr. Sheehan for 3 to finish the round.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for our witnesses. Great testimony today, and I think I love that strong and resilient statement. I think it speaks to truth to what entrepreneurs have to be. Ms. Nippanak, you did talk about how there's massive barriers already for Aboriginal-led businesses and for women. We've heard in the past that startup for women-led organizations in Canada as a whole only receive less than 2% of funding for what we call venture capital. It's extremely difficult, and what I've heard today, not just with the barriers, and you talked about lack of support, even sexism, but also what we've heard going further, which is 1,100 businesses delisted because of the lack of verifiability and what that means for businesses. I'd like to ask both of you, Ms. Perron and Ms. Nippanak, on access to capital. And what has the government done to allow, first, more access to capital, not just funding, but from banks? We talk about something called open banking, which allows banks to be able to bank other businesses, including Indigenous businesses. But how has the access to capital been for Indigenous-led businesses, and how do we improve that as a whole? Start with Ms. Perron.
Thank you for your question. For us, this was the whole reason why we developed a microloan fund, so we could reduce the barriers for Indigenous women, particularly those that had smaller micro businesses, as I mentioned, part-time or home-based, and reduce some of the requirements to make it more accessible. In terms of other financial institutions, mainstream banks, et cetera, I think what would be valuable would really for those institutions to go through some kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, or cultural sensitivity and awareness training, so that when they're working with Indigenous women entrepreneurs, they can do that in a more respectful way. I think that those first impressions are really important, and what makes our network so unique when we're working with Indigenous entrepreneurs is that it's really about the relationship. As Indigenous peoples, we're relational, and we have to build trust, and particularly with non-Indigenous financial institutions, the trust is not there. So it really takes time to get to know the entrepreneurs and build that foundation of trust so that they can move forward. So that would be some advice I would recommend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Sheehan for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for your testimony. It's very informative. Where I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and it's right on the St. Mary's River, and it has been a traditional place for First Nations to come to fish the whitefish, and they would smoke them there. And this is before the settlers came, and they came from all over Canada and the United States. And so naturally when people gather, Sault Ste. Marie, the area they're in, which we call Turtle Island, Boating, became a place of trade. And, it really has exceptionally grown. So some of the things that, I wanted to ask about is, in Northern Ontario, for example, we have FedNor, which is a regional economic development agency, and that has been combined in with Patty Hajdu, who's the Minister for Indigenous Services. And the thought behind that was about economic reconciliation. So to either one of you, have you had much dealings with various regional economic development agency as you kind of layer things for your clients for support? Or any other federal program, if you will?
I would say for us, our Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Initiative was really a patchwork of accessing funds through different federal government departments, and primarily Indigenous Services Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. We also worked with the Regional Development Agency for Ontario. And of course, for our Indigenous financial institutions, we funnel funding out to them, and they also have relationships with their regional development agencies as well.
And anyone else?
I'm sorry, I can't really add to that question, but I do believe that those connections would very likely be required moving forward.
And the relationship with each individual First Nation, which is absolutely important because they're autonomous onto themselves with chief and council, all having their own economic development officers and agencies. For instance, I just announced $747 million from Environment Canada for a variety of projects that are going to help save the Great Lakes, the flora and fauna around there. 1 in 4 people get their drinking water from the Great Lakes. And as Chief Karen Bell said, they're the natural stewards. Do you see a lot of work with Indigenous female entrepreneurs as it relates to the environment in Canada?
I would say so. Certainly, the work in the community in terms of safe drinking water and in terms of the plants and the fauna around us is very critical to the air that we breathe, and ensuring that the beauty and the landscape and our connection to the land is part of that development is critically important. I believe that Indigenous women have played a strong role in whether it's harvesting medicines through the land and ensuring that land is healthy. That was traditionally the role of the women, and so we want to ensure that that's sustained over generations and lifetimes. So the work is and if those opportunities exist, absolutely should be promoted.
All right, we have completed the first two rounds. Thank you so very much for this very valuable information. I wish you both much success in the future as you move forward. For a moment before we change witness panels. Thank you very much. Order. We have with us now Indigenous Tourism Alberta, Brenda Holder, Cree Traditional Knowledge Keeper by video conference, and Startup Canada, Kyla Isabel, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you both. We will start with opening remarks for up to 5 minutes from each one of you, and then we will go into questions from the members. Ms. Holder, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Tansei ni totoak Brenda Nitsiagasen ni tantio chias niwatsia. My name is Brenda Holder. I am coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, originally one of the original people from Jasper National Park. I'm a Cree knowledge holder. I run my own Indigenous tourism company. I'm the sole owner of my company. And I am also the chair for Indigenous Tourism Alberta, of which I believe I am representing today. And I am happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Isabel, please, for up to 5 minutes.
and members of the committee. It's a privilege to bring the perspectives of the Startup Canada community to your important discussions here around Canada's inclusive international trade policies. My name is Kayla Isabel, and I'm the CEO of Startup Canada. I also sit on the Allied for Startups Continental Council, working on international startup policy, and as a board member on the Ottawa Board of Trade, where we champion the needs of the local business community. Startup Canada is a national nonprofit that supports and advocates for early-stage Canadian entrepreneurs, startups, and small businesses. Our mission is to help accelerate the growth of founders by providing access to the thousands of resources, programs, and support organizations that exist locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally. With over 250 annual partners, we play a vital role in driving the entrepreneurial spirit across the country through collaboration. We have 3 programs of relevance for today's conversation that really inform our perspective. Our Startup Women program engages over 4,900 women entrepreneurs annually from over 278 cities across Canada. This program for early-stage women founders across all industries provides access to the diverse women support ecosystem, including ecosystem players like the Forum and private sector partners like Scotiabank Women Initiative. Top industries represented are arts, media, entertainment, digital technologies, healthcare, social assistance, bioscience, and professional scientific and technical services. Our Startup Global program also engages a number of founders, over 6,000 early-stage aspiring exporters from 164 cities across the country. We connect with them with support organizations like Export Development Canada, private sector partners like UPS and Google, and export-focused nonprofit organizations like the Forum for International Trade Training, also known as FIT. Notably, we have over 36% representation of women in this program, which highlights the growing interest among women entrepreneurs to expand globally. Unfortunately, we've seen this number go down from 2020, when gender parity actually existed in the program. Top industries represented here are agriculture, forestry, agri-food, professional, scientific, and technical services, and clean technology. Lastly, due to the demand for support specifically at the intersection of women's entrepreneurship and international expansion, Startup Canada, in partnership with UPS, developed a women's exporter program designed with a focus on consumer packaged goods, also known as CPG, companies looking to expand globally. In year 1, we engaged a cohort of 150 women founders and achieved a 9.2 Net Promoter Score out of 10, which really speaks to the success and satisfaction of the program. Against this backdrop of experience, I really want to take this opportunity to highlight several key points that are central to the ongoing discussions in the context of Canada's international trade landscape, and specifically from the lens of women entrepreneurs. Number 1, access to funding and allocation of funding. I know you've heard this message consistently from many of those testifying here today and in previous days. The number 1 challenge reported by women founders when discussing international expansion is access to capital. According to the 2023 report from the Canadian Women's Foundation, as many of you know, women-led businesses receive only 2% of venture capital funding in Canada. We've heard frustration as well from founders around the accessibility of things like the Can Export program, particularly as an early-stage entrepreneur without traction. We at Startup Canada have also experienced difficulty accessing government funding to deliver our programs. This year, we saw cuts to our Trade Commissioner Services funding due to budget constraints, despite 6 years of demonstrated results. Further, we continue to see a disproportionate amount of funding go to high-growth, male-led companies, which is an ongoing concern in the entrepreneurship space. We need to be deploying capital to women founders who are looking to scale globally and to trusted ecosystem players with existing, established networks of women entrepreneurs. When government investments are made, we must ensure a firmer gender balance in terms of program participation, funding allocations, and accountability, with specific metrics to measure progress. Number 2 is streamlined access to resources, tools, and community. We hear from founders time and time again that they like to expand internationally, but simply do not know where to start. For instance, from a 2022 survey by our partners at the Forum for International Trade Training, FIT, they found that 55% of Canadian SMEs are unaware of government export programs and support. This lack of awareness can be a critical barrier to accessing resources such as the Trade Accelerator Program, also known as TAP. If women founders are unaware of these initiatives, or they simply do not feel that these are spaces for them, we are perpetuating a cycle of exclusion. We need to ensure programming is tailored to industries more often dominated by women, such as CPG and retail, and that community is built in collaboration with trusted organizations with existing access to women founders. Women entrepreneurs want to scale. They need to be connected to the right organizations and resources that are the right fit at the right time of their development and with an industry-specific representation outside of just traditional tech. Thirdly, the potential of women-led companies. There is no shortage of women-led companies aspiring to go global. In fact, 33% of Canadian women entrepreneurs reported international expansion as one of their top business priorities, according to a 2023 study by the Business Development Bank of Canada, another one of our partners. These entrepreneurs need access to capital, a supportive network, and a stronger platform to share their story and position Canada's leading businesses on the global stage. It's critical that we address these gaps and ensure women founders have equal opportunities to succeed in the international market. In closing, I urge the committee to consider these barriers and take meaningful action to create a more inclusive, accessible environment for women entrepreneurs looking to expand globally. I look forward to engaging with the committee, providing further insights, and answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to committee members. Mr. Baldinelli for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentations from the witnesses here today. I'm going to begin with Ms. Holder. My understanding is, in addition to your role as Chair of Indigenous Tourism Alberta, you're also the Vice Chair of the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Past summer, I know the president of ITAC publicly expressed concern that ITAC was facing major cuts that could set Indigenous-led tourism, including women-led tourism businesses, back a decade. In July, at the height of the tourism season, he informed staff that around half of the organization's staff could be laid off. I'm just wondering if you could update us on the status of that. And they also talked about office closures. Did that indeed happen?
Well, before I really state that, one of the things that I want to make very clear is that Indigenous women entrepreneurs in the tourism industry are approximately 30% of that part of the industry, which I think really needs to be shouted from the rooftops. And yes, indeed, we have suffered very significant losses in terms of staff layoffs due to significant cutbacks to our industry and specifically to ITAC. We have continued to maintain the office. How long that will happen, I'm not sure, but we're certainly doing our best to continue to move forward despite these cutbacks.
Thank you for that. I mean, and people don't realize, before COVID, the fastest growing tourism segment was the Indigenous tourism experience and segment at $1.9 billion, I believe that was in 2019 alone. And then with COVID, that all but vanished, including all of the supports that went here too. And I remember during COVID and the government support programs, there were a lot of concerns expressed, many associated with what we heard earlier on the procurement side about funding and concerns that ITAC was raising that tourism businesses were providing Indigenous experiences, yet these experiences were not led by Indigenous organizations or businesses or women-led entrepreneurs. And I was wondering if you could comment on that and some of the concerns that you have there.
Yeah, I certainly can. I will give one specific case, to be quite honest. I'm not going to name the name of the company, but it is a large, well-known company that is really appropriating Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous experiences to promote their own business. They partnered up very briefly with a community and got their stories to do with night skies and various other things. They paid this community, in my opinion, a very small fee. I believe it was around $40,000. And this company continues to benefit from those stories, even though they have essentially released this community from the partnership. So this is gross appropriation and utilizing Indigenous knowledge to further themselves, but giving a one-time fee to a community. I think it's abysmal.
Well, thank you, Ms. Holder. And I guess that's why ITAC took the steps of working towards an accreditation program. It's called the Original. Sadly, I think a minister missed that memo when this program was being created. And I was just wondering if you could talk about the Original, the Mark of Excellence, that accreditation program that's been established by ITAC.
Yeah, I can speak very briefly on that. The accreditation of the original is to ensure authenticity within the tourism industry, Indigenous tourism industry. Not only to ensure authenticity, but to ensure that the recipients of that accreditation are export ready, that they have community behind them. There are numerous hoops to jump through, so to speak, that, in my opinion, make an incredibly exceptional experience for our guests. So it really sets up the operators or the community or the Indigenous organization for success, and also to ensure that when our tourists show up in Canada, or if they're local tourists, that they can be assured that the experience that they are going to be engaging in is authentic and it is an Indigenous experience and not one led by somebody who's just doing an Indigenous theme program.
And lastly, Ms.
You have 30 seconds left.
How have rural and remote Indigenous communities in Alberta done in terms of its recovery since COVID?
There is a real mixed bag. I know that there are certain businesses who have worked very hard and recovered well. The story is not the same across the entire province. We are gearing up to do better, and Indigenous Tourism Alberta is offering all the support we can and really trying to ensure that Indigenous tourism thrives in this province.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Aria for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I welcome Ms. Isabel from Startup Canada. I have to recognize that majority of the board members of Startup Canada are women. I think including the team, majority of them are women. Good to know that. I know you are not women-focused only, but still it's good to see that majority of the board members and the management team are women. Before my question, I just want to mention that today, 27% of the board positions across Canada are held by women, 27%. And it is up from 11% in 2014. In fact, among the TSX listed companies, 30% of the board positions are held by women. And it did not happen just like that, because we did pass a bill in 2016, Bill C-25, where we asked the publicly listed organizations to mention their diversity policy in their annual statement to the stakeholders. And I remember that I had to fight to get the definition of diversity. That bill did not mention, even now the legislation does not mention the definition of diversity, but I think I compromised when the regulation identified diversity includes women, people, Indigenous people, visible minorities, and people with disabilities. Though 30% of the TSX-listed companies have women on the board, only 10% of the overall board members, including men and women, belong to visible minorities. And only 1%, including men and women amongst all the board members, belong to Indigenous people. So when we look at the 30% women, and if we dig deeper, we don't have the statistics there. If we dig deeper, I'm sure the percentage of women belonging to visible minorities and Indigenous people will be less than 1%, maximum 1%, maybe 2%, if you want to be very generous. So there's still a lot of things that needs to be done. And that is where we are going. Ms. Isabel, a couple of questions for you. One thing I got small objection to your speech is that, again, you come like many witnesses before the committee is asking for, we need more funds, we need more funds. I mean, that is sort of like a broken record, in spite of the government providing record amount of funds to various programs for women entrepreneurship and women in business under various programs. In fact, a part of your statement also indicated that the problem is not with the amount of funding that is made available. Forget the cuts that some of the political parties are proposing. The problem is not with the amount of funding that is available, because part of your statement also said 56% of the women founders did not know that there were programs. So the problem is not with the funds, it is with the knowledge, the education. And you also mentioned that they got problems in exports. Let's talk about exports. You know, before joining politics, I was a part of a small company, export-oriented company. I know part of the funding for yours comes from EDC, if I'm not wrong. Then you should know that EDC has got programs for small businesses, both women-owned or not, where if they get the contract, I think 70% of that is getting funded by them. So there are funds available. EDC has got hundreds of millions of dollars available to fund export. It is the education that is required for women entrepreneurs to take advantage of the funding that is available. So coming to the question, you mentioned helping women entrepreneurship in different sectors, different segment of the economy. But maybe I missed it. You didn't mention the manufacturing sector. In general, the knowledge-based sector, I think that was very small, if I'm not wrong. Am I right?
Knowledge-based is actually quite high with our programming.
Okay. So what within the knowledge-based sector is high, and what percentage of women are in these knowledge-based industries?
It depends on the program that we engage with, our Startup Women program or Startup Global.
I'm sorry, I was not talking about the program who the women entrepreneurs are accessing it. But my question is that in the knowledge-based sector itself, outside of the programs that you run, there are very few women in manufacturing. There are very few, increasing, but still small percentage of women in knowledge-based industries. So my specific question to you is that you know the various funding programs that is available from the government, like IRAP, SRED. Is it good if we carve out a portion of those existing funding programs and say that a percentage of that is directed towards women, the companies managed by or owned by women?
I think there's two parts of that, and I appreciate the challenge on the testimony in that there is a tremendous amount of funding available. I completely agree with you, but I do think a lot of it is either left on the table or in the moment it doesn't go to a women founder, it ends up kind of perpetuating the cycle. It goes to a male-led business. I think targeting specific industries absolutely makes sense. Where there could be some opportunities is looking at that intersection of identity. In the manufacturing space, there are probably programs and organizations that have that niche subject matter expertise. I can't think of a lot of women support organizations that I know within my network that also have that expertise. If there's a way, not necessarily to build more funding or look at building something net new, but leveraging collaboration to bring both of those characters into one program or explore this with a bit of a pilot, that I think is the model moving forward, instead of building too many net new programs across all these intersections. There is a tremendous amount of programming out there that I hesitate to adding too many more.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. My first question will be for Ms. Isabel. I will be asking you a question that I asked to our earlier panel. That was the first hour of this meeting. Given that you lead a startup company, I think that this will be especially interesting. Are there barriers related to the Indian Act concerning companies that are on what we unfortunately call reserves? So I asked the question earlier on. So I'd like to talk about new entrepreneurs. Does this create any challenges? when a company uses your services, have you used any tactics to bypass these obstacles?
Great question. Thank you for posing that. I think within our programs, we support maybe 4% Indigenous founders. What we do is always partnering with Indigenous-led organizations. We have no Indigenous-specific programming at Startup Canada. We will partner with Indigenous podcasters. We'll partner with folks like Magnolia at NACA. That's our approach to ensuring their programs are integrated into Startup Canada's initiatives. And if there's something that's beneficial for their community, they also get that access. So I think there are a lot of barriers. It was mentioned before in Magnolia's testimony around trust building. In showcasing a diverse community of Indigenous founders, we have some great success stories that I can think of, like Jennifer from Cheekbone Beauty. We can look at Bobby Rysett, who's an incredible tech entrepreneur and has raised the largest round of any Indigenous founder in Canada. We have these great champions who are the next businesses that we really need to profile. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity for partnership with Indigenous-led entities, folks that are supporting every type of entrepreneur and telling those stories from a wider podium so that more Indigenous entrepreneurs are actually inspired by that kind of more varied community of Indigenous founders that are really scaling as well, speaking to the global kind of topic.
Donc, vous, de votre côté, vous représentez.
So you said you represent a small minority, but do you have an explanation as to why there is not more representation? And I'd also like to ask you, when we think of a startup, we imagine youth, the younger generations. In terms of Indigenous youth, what is missing to motivate them to jump into these types of endeavors?
Thank you for that question. In terms of why there's not more representation, it takes a lot longer to develop relationships with Indigenous communities than it has historically with other partners that we have. And that is intentional. That needs to be a part of the process. We need to build that trust. For example, Startup Canada, we did a national tour that we've done this year. We did it last year, and it intentionally began in Whitehorse. Incredible Indigenous communities in the north. It took us 2 years to probably, enter into some of those conversations, build trust on the programming, have them understand our perspective and where we were coming from, and then we could really enter into a partnership. There's also no funding for those types of, relationship building activities, nor do I necessarily think that there should be. But it needs to take a cultivated approach and a very thoughtful one to build these relationships. With Indigenous youth, I've seen some great announcements funded through the private sector actually supporting with Indigenous communities. I know the MasterCard Foundation just announced this week with the Indigenous Prosperity Forum, I believe, that they're doing a program to support 2,000 Indigenous youth and equipping them both with mentors, programming, those types of supports. Again, I think it comes at the intersection of Indigenous-led programming, larger programs across the country, and trying to develop partnerships to inspire that next generation and make sure Indigenous youth are included in that.
Et puis donc,
And then also in the first panel, we talked about companies that are not necessarily Indigenous, and despite this, are receiving funding that was for Indigenous companies. Have you witnessed this personally?
I haven't witnessed it personally. I obviously trust the comments made by my colleagues. We have seen this with women founders, though, and having women in leadership positions and quickly, taken off of those leadership positions as they apply for funding. We have seen this, and I think this comes to the question of not just checking boxes. We have to look really thoroughly and be deeply accountable to ensuring we have representation from diverse communities.
Et puis dans
Amongst your members, your clientele, those that you represent, I would imagine that there are some of them that, or rather when they start out, they're not probably receiving government contracts. I'm sure that takes time. But have you had any members who have managed to make it to these high-level government contracts early on?
We have not. Nobody comes to mind at the moment. Procurement and government procurement always seems like this beautiful opportunity. It's sort of a carrot that I often feel is dangled to many early stage founders, but government's not going to partner with a very early stage company. We receive quite a few partner testimonies to this. I can think of the Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. They do a great job in bridging some of their diverse founders and ensuring direct access to the folks that have that procurement vehicle in government. Many of our companies, they're 0 to 9 employees, they're under $1 million in revenue. Some of them are too much in their infancy, but the idea is how do we make those connections? We do this through one of our Startup Gov programs so that they at least know who to call once they're at that space and at that stage. But the process itself, we hear time and time again, is very laborious, very difficult, and founders are working on building their business. They don't necessarily want to be doing all the paperwork.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being present with us today in this important study. It's one of the greatest barriers we have in our country. It was made mention by my colleague, Mr. Arya, just the fact of the low level of representation of women on senior executive boards. There has been, of course, movement in this. Canada should be a leader in this space, though. It's not going fast enough. When you speak about international access, I think that's a really important issue. And I'd like to spend some time speaking about that issue after I spend some time speaking about the importance of Indigenous tourism with Ms. Holder. Ms. Holder, I have a bio here of you. I'm not certain if we'd ever actually met, to be very frank, before, but I see you're a descendant of former Iroquois chief Michel Caracante. I am also a descendant of Michel Band's Chief Caracante. So it's likely we're related somewhere deep down that line in the late 1800s. So it's good to meet a cousin from a long time away. You are the Vice Chair of Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada and the Alberta Director. One of the largest issues that we're hearing when it comes to Indigenous tourism, the barriers to it, is capital. We talked about that capital barrier. There's a consequence to not accessing capital, which is Indigenous women are often taking their own savings, their own source revenue that they've generated in order to build those companies. And that's huge, and we admire them for that. You yourself, I'm sure, know exactly what that feels like to build up a company. But there's a critical moment in there where it's how do you commercialize it? This is when I talk to people right across Alberta, particularly women who want to get involved in Indigenous tourism, this is a barrier. They do everything right. They literally build this beautiful site, just like you have, but then they don't know what to do after that because they have the stories, they have the pride, they have everything, but they don't have the clients. They don't know how to bridge that gap. What could you recommend as a program or service that would support this work, or what would you recommend these women do in this circumstance?
That is a fantastic question, and I appreciate you asking that, and it is such a delight to meet you. Thank you, cousin. And this is most certainly a very difficult question to even answer because there are so many nuances that are involved in it. If I kind of take a step back and I think about my own journey as an Indigenous woman within the tourism industry, I had probably one of the most difficult journeys of my entire life in trying to get funding. And I worked very hard to do all of the right things, and I ended up having some support from what was back then called Aboriginal Business Canada, a very small amount of money. And they offered, I believe it was 70% of the grant money, and I had to provide 30%. In order to do that, I was expected to get a loan from the bank. It was 7 times that I was refused, even with an absolute outstanding business plan that was written and provided by Aboriginal Business Canada at the time. They found somebody that could do a good business plan for me. I really was not very high risk, but really having to work hard to try and establish myself as a credible person that was going to be able to carry this out. over time, it feels like you're just chipped away at, and you go through all of these hard things, and then you're faced with this absolute monster called marketing. And as an Aboriginal or an Indigenous woman, that is a word that we just simply truly don't understand in terms of how do we procure all of these clients, especially overseas, when we're told, oh my God, Germany's going to fall all over itself for you. But it certainly doesn't happen. And I kind of feel that, the ball has been really dropped, not only with the financial aspect of it, but all of the other supports that we require in order to educate ourselves enough to be able to understand how to move forward in a business. So one of the things that, sorry, go ahead.
No, you please.
One of the things that we're working on with Indigenous Tourism Alberta is something called the Sixth Senses program, which is absolutely magical, and it is providing that support for entrepreneurs, along with some excellent mentors who've been there, done that.
What you've mentioned today, in particular, the marketing challenge, is the biggest one, because I hear that all the time too. I hear it whether it's in relation to Germans or Europeans, folks from the United States, Asia. They all want to see what we have to offer. They all want access to this unique experience, this authentic experience, and the ability to do that in a really good way. And I think you've given us today a very important answer, which is this challenge about capital access and marketing. The capital access portion is shocking to hear, that someone of very high credibility with a business plan, 7 times you were rejected. That's a significant barrier, and I don't have enough time, but in the next round, we'll hopefully have a chance to delve deeper into that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, on to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I'll start my questions with Startup Canada. Thank you for being here. And one of the things that you mentioned in your opening address talked about capital and access to capital as being one of the biggest challenges for women entrepreneurs, and including startups as well. And the Canadian Venture Capital and Private Equity Association co-signed a letter with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to the Finance Minister, saying that the Liberals' proposed capital gains tax increase, quote, sows division at a time when we need a Team Canada approach to economic growth, unquote. And so my question is, will the capital gains tax hike impact the startups you work with and their ability to access capital in order to grow and potentially export?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I cannot say I've heard from a single founder how the capital gains tax is going to benefit them. I think that's probably my answer.
Wow. Do you have any sense as to a dollar figure as to the lost opportunity that might be there?
I think there's an overall fear. I think that potentially might be clouding what will become the actual net of it. I don't think there was a concrete understanding as to why it was put into place and what benefit it was intending to serve. But I can say unequivocally, all of the feedback that we've received through our advocacy and through our programming has been concern around the capital gains tax.
Well, that's very impactful because you definitely are working with a lot of women entrepreneurs, are you not? Mm-hmm. Recent calculations by renowned economist Jack Mintz showed that the capital gains tax hike across all sectors will reduce Canada's GDP by $90 billion, real per capita GDP by 3%, its capital stock by $127 billion, and employment by 404,000. So, based on what you know, the work that you do and the women entrepreneurs that you work with, will Canada be less competitive for talent, investment, or capital in the global market because of the Liberal capital gains tax hike?
I think this sentiment around competitiveness and ensuring that we are not only maintaining Canadian companies, we're maintaining Canadian talent to feed into those incredible companies. This has been a conversation for quite some time, before my time at Startup Canada. I think we are constantly losing incredible founders because of the environment and the perception of comfort with risk in Canada, and the supports that I think a lot of founders perceive we may not have. To my point earlier, the access to capital, I think, is actually the challenge. It's not that there isn't money to access or support. To ensure that we have incredible businesses that are staying in Canada and growing, and we have more exits that are actually staying in Canada. The capital gains tax, I'm sure, will impact that, especially when we see to our southern borders very. I don't want to use the word positive, but appealing tax sort of environments. So I do think it's an important variable, but we need to be very serious if we want to be competitive and really wave our Canadian flag proudly internationally. We need to be looking at why so many Canadian companies are going to the U.S. and shifting from Waterloo to Silicon Valley and beyond that.
We are seeing a lot of businesses and a lot of entrepreneurs moving to the U.S., and you're hearing that as well?
I think that's been the case for quite a while. I don't think that that's new. I think there's an appetite for risk in the U.S. that is higher. I think people think they can get bigger checks in the U.S. They can also stand on a larger podium. There's, when I do my international work across the EU, I don't think any of them could mention a Canadian founder at the top of, if you ask them to name somebody successful, they would be able to, provide an inventory of American entrepreneurs, but also may have thought a Canadian founder was American. And so we really need to do a job as a collective, the entire ecosystem, proudly showcasing Canadian innovation globally.
So over the last 9 years, has Canada, based on your experience and the entrepreneurs that you work with, become a more challenging country for entrepreneurs to access venture capital and private equity? Has the capital pool shrunk or grown? And as part of that as well, because we're almost out of time here, how much do you think cutting taxes as well as red tape and bureaucracy in the tax system would improve our economic growth?
I think red tape reduction needs to be a #1 priority. We consistently hear that and have for years. When we talk about the overall capital pool, it's been very encouraging to see more women-led VCs enter the space. I can think of, a handful. Then I know my colleague Sonia Shorey mentioned a number yesterday that partner with, folks like SheBoot. That is an important part of the equation, women writing checks to women-led ventures. We also need to see more male-led VCs writing larger checks to Canadian women and being that champion and actually being that ally with their purse strings and not just saying we support women. We have one person on our leadership team.
I'm going to have to, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's such valuable information, but I just have to cut you off. Terry, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much to both presenters. And my first question is to start up, Kylie. We have a mutual friend, I believe, Nevin Bokonjic from Sault Ste. Marie. He's founded startup Sault Ste. Marie in 2012. He used to work for me at a small business enterprise center I ran, an entrepreneurship center. And he has started a multitude of business, written a bunch of books. And right now he is working with his daughter. They wrote a book together, Hannah. She's in elementary school. And he and I have had opportunities to speak. And, he's really wants to push entrepreneurship for young people, in particular women like his daughter. What advice do you have for this committee for, how the federal government could help get to the young people? I know education is a provincial matter, but and perhaps things that startups that your business is doing.
Thank you so much for that question, and I'm a huge fan of Nevin. And for anybody who's looking for, maybe a holiday stocking stuffer, his book that he developed with his daughter Hannah, I think it's 40 different startup ideas that any young person can create. So definitely a great shout out to their work. I think when it comes to activating and inspiring young potential entrepreneurs. This has ebbed and flowed. I've been with Startup Canada for just over 5 years. When I started, entrepreneurship was, what everybody wanted. You'd see all of these, quote, kind of overnight successes pop up, and everybody wanted to be a founder, disrupting some type of space. Now, seeing through the pandemic how uncertain that type of lifestyle is, how much risk you're taking on, throw in interest rates, throw in economic uncertainty, throw in global conflict, Canada Post strikes that impact, thousands of small businesses right before Black Friday. Many young potential aspiring entrepreneurs are seeing a lot of this, both noise and also a realistic perspective on what it is to be a founder. You're shifting your 9 to 5 to work 24/7, as they say. I think we need to look at that risk appetite, ensure that folks that want to build businesses that are going to radically transform the future of Canada and the world we need to bring in those perspectives and those ideas. We do need to be hopeful, but there is a pretty intense and difficult climate that they're navigating into, and we need them to understand that full risk also before going all in, especially when it comes to women founders, to Mrs. Desjardins' point of leveraging their own capital. Women entrepreneurs are way less likely to take on debt, and they're more likely to take on or use their own funding and their own checking accounts and banking accounts. That comes with tremendous risk as well. So we need a full understanding of what entrepreneurship entails, a hopeful message. I'm a very glass half full kind of person, but there's so much potential in bringing, these incredible ideas coming from academic institutions, coming from all across the country, because, youth, they have the ideas that are going to change the future and the world that we live in. So we need to make sure that they're helping build it.
Nevin also mentioned, too, that in his mind it was, because the unemployment rate is so low, people have jobs. And when the unemployment rate is high, people make their own jobs, right? And he was talking about the curriculum and some of the stuff that he's interested in. And also one of the things, too, as well, that we'd be interested to know, networking and what kind of startup networking that you do that is helpful to women entrepreneurs, and mentorship, women mentoring women in business. Now, I know a lot about Future Entrepreneur, the federal program for 18 to 39-year-olds that have 18,000 businesses served, over 14,000 business startups helped. 42% of them are women, which is a better number than it was years before. But, what can we do to get that number up higher, too, as well, if you don't mind?
I love that question. So as it pertains to networking, that is really our bread and butter at Startup Canada, is providing access from these early stage founders to the network of support that exists. So I think of programming that we do, like our Startup Canada tour. We travel to a number of different destinations all across the country, from Whitehorse to Halifax to Calgary to Brampton to all of these different spaces. And we create a physical environment where the support ecosystem partners come, private sector engages, early stage founders, government. We engage all of the stakeholders involved in entrepreneurship. So if I have an emerging business, I've got a great idea, I can enter into this space and I can find an incubation program. I can potentially find an angel investor if that's the right path for me. I can find the right government partner once I'm ready for procurement. We're trying to sort of decrease the tension points in those access, because when you're Googling, if you're a small business and you're Googling, how do I start my company, you're going to get a whole bunch of different resources. So our tour is a way of really bringing that to life. On the mentorship piece, this, I think, particularly when, 5 years ago when I started at Startup, there were a tremendous number of mentorship programs, and that was where a tremendous amount of funding was going to, was building more and more mentorship. How do we actually focus on the mentorship programs that are most meaningfully supporting women founders? I think of the Forum. They received West funding, and they have an excellent mentorship program. What we do now, instead of building our own, we point people to them. And we say, leverage this fantastic session and initiative with them.
Thank you very much,
Ms.
Anthony. Apologies
I
to
could talk
cut
about
you
this all
off.
day.
You need to come back. You've got a huge amount of information to share with us. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, petite question, juste rapide.
Yes, a quick question before we move on to the next question. Are you working in Quebec as well?
So in part, we've held our Startup Canada tour and some export programming specifically in Montreal.
J'ai pas d'interprétation, Madame la Présidente.
Oui, un peu en Montréal et avec Startup Fest.
Yes, in Montreal and with Startup Fest.
Thank you, ça fonctionne.
Okay.
We have done. We do so in partnership with a lot of Quebec-based organizations. Bonjour Montréal, we've partnered with. Main, I know Startup Montreal and some of those entities have shifted. And then with Startup Fest, we actually held a women's session in partnership with Startup Fest to ensure that we weren't adding duplication into the ecosystem. We do so in kind of true collaboration with Quebec-based other organizations. But we need to do more.
Vous seriez la bienvenue. Et puis je suis convaincu.
You would be very welcome, and I'm sure many companies would be thrilled to work with you. That being said, do you have a lot of exporting companies amongst your members?
Absolutely. Through our Startup Global program, we have about 6,200 entrepreneurs engaged. Of that community, I'd say 45% are actually exporting. Many of them are aspiring exporters.
C'est là-dessus qu'on peut constater que...
So we can see that most exporting companies that are women-owned tend to be smaller than their counterparts that are owned by men. Do you have any explanations for this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that from our standpoint, we have the pipeline. The issue is not the pipeline in companies that have scaling potential, that have great leadership, that have incredibly strong Canadian roots. Back to my point around accessing capital for that international expansion, I don't think women founders know where to access that. To the point around Export Development Canada, et cetera, yes, there are some small business initiatives, but often that's kind of mid-market and for more of the scale-up community coming through some of our partners. So where is that support for early-stage funders? We try to connect them there. In terms of our other programs, we always have a pro-exporting narrative. So through our women's program, it's not exclusively for exporters, but it's both a storytelling opportunity. We need to showcase how women are exporting. I think of Nita Adalcini Stainless, unbelievable exporter that's often profiled, but she shares a lot of hurdles around exporting her product. And so we try to both champion those perspectives to government and then also have her serve as a bit of a mentor and guide to other aspiring women exporters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desjardins, for 2.5.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Holder, just in our previous round of questioning, we talked about some of the barriers related to international access for clientele for Indigenous tourism. There's an international trade agreement that actually our Honourable Chair is quite familiar with, which is the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Agreement. Are you familiar with that agreement?
I am not.
Agreement, and as a matter of just quick transparency on it, it's related to trying to see greater economic cooperation of Indigenous peoples between the countries of Canada, other countries that have Indigenous peoples, such as New Zealand, Australia, and Taiwan. All of us have the very unique and I'd say ultimate blessing of having Indigenous people within the boundaries of their communities. We need to see these groups cooperate. I'm a champion of this agreement. I think it's a very good agreement that the government has entered into for the purpose of this. My criticism of this, however, comes from trying to engage Indigenous people into it. You don't know about it. Many Indigenous people I've spoken to don't know about it. I would like to see Indigenous people come together with our partners in these communities to ensure that we have a greater framework of Indigenous peoples' economic trade cooperation framework. And I think it's something incumbent upon our committee, actually. Something we should contemplate studying in the future as to how can we create a guiding framework for the implementation of IPECA that would see, hopefully, tourists, for example, between all of our great countries, be able to share resources and share ideas, but most importantly, that network so that we can get a streamline of people in tourism. Would you be interested in participating, for example, in the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Agreement work, should it ever be studied in this committee? And in addition to that question, what do you think the opportunities are for tourists in the Pacific Asia region?
I really appreciate that question a great deal. And first of all, yes, I would certainly be interested in that. But one thing I will point you to is recently ITAC has teamed up with IANTA in the United States and Maori Tourism to create a new committee known as DOIT, Destination Original Indigenous Tourism. So this is a global effort that we are currently working on, and I would highly encourage you to seek that out and to get more information on that. It's something that we announced last year at the International Indigenous Tourism Conference, and we just recently had 2 of our executive board members, as well as our CEO and our vice president, go to Louisiana to meet for their official first signing of the agreement.
Thank you very much, Ryan. 3 minutes.
I'll take it.
And 3 minutes for Ms. Fortier.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Yep. Thank you very much to our witnesses. This is great testimony. We're hearing a lot today. Obviously, the big barriers and challenges for startups in general in Canada, but specifically for women in business. We know we've heard from past witnesses that VCs, venture capital for women businesses, is less than 2%. And definitely, Ms. Holder, hearing from you that you were denied 7 times from our banks, from traditional banks. And so I've been talking a lot in the House of Commons about competition for banking, and that's open banking. I'll start with you, Ms. Isabel. And I was also a founding member of Startup Bay of Quinte back in 2017, so know your organization well. You do a great job. Can you tell me the benefits of open banking and what it would help for those founders and those women entrepreneurs specifically who are struggling looking for funding?
Thank you so much for that question, and great to see a community leader joining and having the perspective of obviously running communities across the country. I think when it comes to banking, open banking, fintechs that are trying to emerge across Canada and innovate in that space, and looking at the private sector overall, we work very closely with a number of banks through Startup Canada. That's actually how we get a lot of our sponsorship and how we survive. I've seen a lot of great programming actually coming through, the Scotiabanks doing Scotiabank Women Initiative and various folks like that. When it comes to open banking, I think it's something that could dramatically transform entrepreneurship in general. I think obviously with women's entrepreneurship, it could be something positive as well. But we need to ensure that, to Ms. Holder's point, there's trust built with the FIs. We see more programs like SWI popping up, and that we have more confidence that our financial institutions are really committed to this change, and that we're seeing some reporting from them come out.
So on that note, we've been waiting. It's almost 7 years for open banking. The government's promised legislation. It's always down the road. The Americans may get open banking up before we do, and that's a big risk because it's going to force a lot of founders, especially in fintechs, down south. We've already lost $500 billion of investment down south in the last 9 years. So tell me how important it is for the government to present legislation as soon as possible in order to keep investments here, but more importantly, provide competition to founders here in Canada.
Really very important. Please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Briefly.
Oh, very important, and let's look to the EU as well as to the conversations that they've been having, because there's some interesting research going on there with women entrepreneurs.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ms. Fortier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you. I have 2 things I want to share. So my first question quickly, Madame Isabelle, is have your members ever participated to trade missions that the government offers? Yes? Okay, because there's another one coming up in Philippines and Indonesia. I know that Minister Ng is really looking forward to having members, so I'm just extending the invitation. Perfect. The second thing I wanted to say, and you mentioned about, red tape. And in March 31st, 2022, when I was president of the Treasury Board, we tabled Bill S6, and it went through the Senate first. And it is currently in the second reading in the House of Commons. And Bill 6 includes amendments to reduce the administrative burden for businesses, make digital interactions with government easier, simplify regulatory processes, make exemptions from certain regulatory requirements to test new products, and make cross-border trade easier through more consistent and coherent rules across governments. So I think that's probably music to your ears.
Yes.
And this second annual regulatory modernization bill is kind of stuck right now because we need to move forward, I believe. So my invitation is to ask my colleagues, hopefully we can get back into business in the House, and that might be a great solution to support businesses, especially women entrepreneurs, to be able to reduce that red tape. I see you nodding, but I'll just maybe give you the rest of my time to complement this if you have, if you agree with me or not.
I could not agree with you anymore, and this is a nonpartisan issue, right? Reducing red tape for founders, it benefits everyone. So I really I commend that moving forward. I think entrepreneurs would welcome it, and I look forward to seeing some concrete progress made in that space.
I love the nonpartisan approach, so I will lead with my team of other parties to hopefully we can pass this one quickly. And funny is that there's a third one ready after that.
Okay. Thank you so very much to our wonderful witnesses. Ms. Holder, thank you very, very much. Ms. Isabel, thank you. 1 second, the witnesses can leave, but just for the committee's purposes, November 25th, we have our last session on women entrepreneurs, and then we're scheduled to have one more meeting on softwood lumber. At the moment, we do not have any additional witnesses. We've had our meeting on softwood lumber. Is there anyone that wants to, we don't have any other witnesses for the softwood lumber. Do we need to have another meeting on it? Is there anybody that's pressing? Everybody's okay?
Madam Chair, was there a lot of witnesses who said they couldn't make it? Did we? Because we submitted quite a few witnesses.
It's a combination of people not being available and also parties sending having similar witness lists, and so that ended up being less people than expected.
So there's a couple of requests to appears, I guess.
Those have also been invited. Basically, at this point, if we're wanting to have a meeting on December 2nd, the third meeting, we would require more witnesses. At this point, there's no witnesses left to invite on the list that have been previously received. So if the committee is wanting to have that third meeting, it would be necessary to send more witnesses.
Is the question of the chair, sorry, is the question of the chair one of whether or not we should dispense of that meeting? I see. If the question is to not have the meeting, I'm okay not having the meeting if that is the direction of the chair. Should there be no witnesses, there'd be no meeting.
At the moment, we don't have any more witnesses, so before I just cancel it, I want to make sure everybody was comfortable.
Do you guys want to do that?
Can we have some quiet for a minute here? Just a second. Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
We can't really have a meeting if we don't have witnesses, of course, but we could all suggest more witnesses. We often put second choices anyways when we provide our witness lists. So if the first option says no, then we move on to the second one. So I would imagine that we still have some choices left.
Many of them, I gather, were duplicates, witnesses that were coming from the Conservatives, yourself, Mr. Deschalets, and ourselves. So,
Moi, je suis pas mal certain que je l'avais mis, par exemple, en deuxième choix.
I'm pretty sure I put the Quebec forestry industry on second choice, and then there was one other witness that didn't come, but we didn't hear from the Quebec forestry industry, so I would imagine that there are several others that didn't make it in. So we do still have a meeting organized next Wednesday on the 27th, and that witness will be present. Okay, so it's following that meeting. You're talking about then another meeting. Okay. Yes, originally the motion was for 3 meetings.
All right. So we're comfortable with this? Okay. Thank you all very. Yes, so we are having one more on the softwood lumber, which were some companies from Quebec. They're on that list. Mm-hmm. Once we have that meeting, unless somebody comes up with a requirement for additional witnesses, that will be the last meeting.
And what I would ask for is give us till Friday this week to submit witnesses, and if we don't have anyone else, and the other option was if there was another date that worked, if that meeting that the witnesses just couldn't make that date we had, if there was another date, and because we have some room of different meetings, correct? Then maybe it would be able to happen before the Christmas break. I think we want the study done by the Christmas break. We don't want to extend it. So
no, we didn't want to have to do that. So let's everyone just check to see if there's any witnesses that are outstanding that they think are important to get done, and we will try and make sure that it all happens, right? Okay? D'accord. Okay, great. Good. Okay, meeting adjourned.